For Taste the Nation, the Tenement Museum was the ideal place to film because it represented so many of the things that we're trying to illustrate in our show through the different communities that we feature. Not only for our show or for New York, but for the country in general, that neighborhood in the Lower East Side is so important, not only to New York history, but national history over generations and across many immigrant communities. And I think the Tenement Museum has done such a wonderful job of making that history come alive and understanding how those stories are layered on top of each other, how they coexist. They make history palpable and bring it to life in a real visceral and tactile way. That building is so steeped in history and layers of stories. In many ways, the Tenement Museum tells us the story of America, and it's a very important institution that's really, really fun and also is a great landmark in the neighborhood to remind us of how important that area is.
Thank you for joining us for Taste the Tenement. Inspired by Padma Lakshmi's Taste the Nation, we set out to explore the foods and the recipes in our tenement kitchens and in our archives. What we found is that tenement recipes can often collapse time as the recipes link one generation to another. The tenement kitchens also serve to collapse space as we prepare an old world recipe on a new world stove. Our friend Michael Twitty tells us we don't need more recipes, but what we do need are narratives that help us explain how people live their lives, looking at food as windows on the ways people shape their worlds and a way that we can in turn understand our collective history. I'm here in the recreated Rogoshevsky apartment, and this is an apartment that many visitors see on a typical day at the Tenement Museum. What's different is I have with me here our archives. These are in some ways the ingredients of our tours that we usually keep in our cupboards or our archives, but we brought out today to kind of get a sense of the way in which these stories help shape the stories that we tell on our tours. This file in particular tells us about how in the early 1990s, the Tenement Museum found the people who had lived in this building in 97 Orchard, and they also found their descendants. And they gave them an activity of finding recipes that told their family stories in some ways. And so we have foods like apple cakes and pizzas and stews and chicken soups and cabbage soups. We have eggplant salad. We have a noodle pudding. What really fascinated me was not just the recipes, but the stories that people included when they wrote down the recipes. What we have from Josephine Baldizzi Esposito, at the beginning of this, she talked about her mother, Rosaria Baldizzi, who had come from Italy, but then she noted, first recipe may have originated more out of necessity than from a country. They didn't have a lot of money, but they still had to eat. And so she details the recipe or the ingredients for a stew and for bean soups that could be stretched, she wrote, just by adding water, because after all, they're living through the Great Depression.
Always made sure the dinner was there. Whatever she had, we ate. Hard bread, whatever. We had hard bread. She used to soften it with oil and water and put would be a pizza, you know. And there was also what they called home relief at that time. It's welfare today. Then it was home relief, where they would give you potatoes and butter and all that stuff, you know. And I remember going down with a neighbor one time to go pick up the potatoes and the cheese. I guess that's all the cheese boxes.
I get emotional when I come in here. No, I do. This is your great-grandma's home. This was from great-grandma's trousseau from when she got married. Those are her initials, Modulo. These are the government cheese boxes that they used to wait online for. And my grandfather would take them and he would make morning glories. This was their little kitchen. When I was little, I was interested, I was curious. I wanted to know how she was making it and what, because it was so delicious that I have to try this, I have to learn how to do this. I started at 10 years old, I would say, Grandma, can you teach me how to make these meatballs? And she'd say, Mashu. And she would show me how to make these meatballs. So it started with that, and then just watching her making the dough and how they used to keep kneading and the patience that they had with that.
I don't know, I just really wanted to learn how to cook, and seeing Grandma cook all the time. Every Sunday, I wanted to learn. I wanted to ask a lot of chicken parm, just everything that there was on the table. Every Sunday, or anytime we go down to Grandma's house. Going out to your house was the highlight of our week.
Because they were going to eat.
Yeah, because we were going to eat the good Italian food.
You do really well. You're a good cook.
Well,
You do very well.
I'm all right.
No, you do. You make good chicken parm, and you make good pasta, and you make sauce, and you do all that. It's very good. And now you do panelle sandwiches.
Well, now I know how to make a panelle sandwich.
This is called a street food in Italy.
And who taught you? Did your grandma teach you how to make this?
My grandmother, grandma, big grandma, your great grandmother, we all made them. Aunt Pierina made them, Aunt Serena made them, we all made them, but they were special for New Year's Eve. When the bells rang, she came out with this big tray for good luck. I think we're ready now with that. Oh, there you go. And it'll be nice. Now that sound reminds me of New Year's Eve. When my grandmother would throw the zeppelis in, that was the sound that I
Zeppelis are
hear even when I'm home and I'm not doing anything on New Year's Eve. I hear that sound when the bells go off. Heaping, ricotta, heaping, yeah.
a lot of cheese.
A lot of cheese. The more the cheese, the better. Oh my God, that's delicious. You did good.
You hear a lot about in school in Great Depression what people went through, but when I come here and I can listen to, not only your stories, but listen through the tape, you can really feel and see what these people went through and how they, even though all that was going on, you can see how things brought them together, and even during rough times, and that's not really something that you learn about in school, I would say. I feel like that food in our family is something that, even back then where you're saying Great Depression, now a pandemic, is something that brings us together, I guess, because, we're stuck in the house and, all right, let's cook, something like that, go on a walk, but the food and Grandma cooked this, Grandma cooked that, and then, it's passed down.
We think about Jenny Levine, like many immigrant women living in this tenement around the turn of the century and in the tenements and the surrounding blocks. She most likely would have left her mother behind. She would have left her aunts behind. She would have left the people who could give her advice behind. Most likely, if she would have seen this cookbook on a pushcart on the Lower East Side, it would have appealed to her because Hinda Amkhanitsky, the author of this cookbook, probably looks a lot like her mother might have looked or her aunts might have looked. And putting her picture on this little cookbook was almost a signal to all these women, you can trust this cookbook. This is the first Yiddish cookbook written by a woman. When Hinda writes the introduction to this book, she addresses it to Jewish daughters, to Yiddische Töchter. She knows that women like Jenny don't have a lot of extra change in their purse. And so she assures them that this is a very economical purchase. She writes that I have 45 years of experience in cooking, baking, and frying and roasting, and I have put all of this experience in a very economical way. That means it will cost the cheapest and it will taste the best, and you will have the benefit of my long years of experience just for a few cents only. The price of my cookbook is only 15 cents. She knows her audience. She knows that these women don't have extra change. So she's making an argument that this cookbook is like a business expense. You're a mother, you're running a household, you might have a boarder, you need to have good food, you need to raise your family well, and you need to be able to attract boarders to get extra income, so you need to build a reputation as a good housekeeper and a good cook. As we look at the table of contents and we see the type of food that she has recommended, we see a lot of what we consider today traditional Jewish foods, chicken soups or compotes or kugels, noodle puddings. But what we also see is that there are slight adaptations of some of these recipes. So for example, the chicken soup is chicken soup mit macaroni. So she has probably learned from her Italian neighbors that macaroni is a wonderful noodle to put in soups. And so she's adapted the classic chicken soup to include macaroni noodles. One of the things we notice when we look at the table of contents is how many recipes are centered around meat. Even when we look at recipes that seem like they're vegetable-based, like a bean soup or a pea soup, we see that they start by frying a piece of meat. What that tells us is that meat was much more plentiful in this neighborhood. And so meat becomes something that Jenny Levine is able to incorporate into her family's food. This cookbook has taught us so much and has helped us understand the women who lived in these tenements in new ways. And in many ways, what it does overall is set into relief the economic role that they played. And in May of 1902, that gets new meaning because that economic role they played in the household becomes a political role in the neighborhood. The price of kosher meat jumps from 12 cents to 18 cents a pound. We've already seen the way that meat had become part of the diet of many of the people who lived here. And all of a sudden, it's become completely impossible with the price increase of over 50%. They're not gonna take that lying down. And what the women do is they use their neighborhood networks. They organized, they had meetings, they put out ads in the newspapers, and they told women, don't buy meat, boycott, let's put a cherem, let's excommunicate meat and take it away out of our diets. And only then will the Meat Trust understand our power.
Werte Schwester, dear sisters, as we hold fast in our bitter struggle against the Beef Trust and against the Jewish butchers who are attacking us from all sides, we beseech you, in the name of humanity, do not despair. Help us in this great battle until victory is achieved.
They boycotted meat for 3 weeks and they organized and they were effective. And ultimately, the price of meat went down to 14 cents a pound. Now keep in mind, these were women, some of whom were citizens, many of whom were not, none of whom could vote, affecting day-to-day life. Women were able to adapt the language and the methods of the labor movement for their religious and cultural purposes. So we're so thankful and so happy that we have this opportunity to bring these women's roles into the spotlight.
This market used to be across the street long time ago when I was a little girl. I used to come with my mother. This is the cilantro.
Right.
You see? And this is part of making the sofrito. So we're gonna
Exactly.
yeah, it smells real good, right?
Right, smell
You
it.
wanna help grandma?
Okay.
Thank you. Remember that I told you about this one?
Yeah.
This is the other. Look, Jose, you see all this? This is all our culture.
This is
We boil, and we
batata.
boil that, we do that with bacalao
Yes,
and, you know,
everything.
bacalao
I
is
remember
catfish.
all that. My mom loved batata.
Yes. So now we're gonna go and get
And do
a
it
red
with us.
pepper because
Yeah.
that's the last ingredient that we need to do my sofrito.
That's
Perfect.
good.
she used to work across the street when she was a little girl. And we call her Nena because she was the little girl when we first came in here. This is my grandson, and me and Francis, we're trying to teach him the culture of el moro de gandule and the sofrito. Mm-hmm. You know that we have an exhibit. You remember Rabonita?
Yes, I do. She's very spicy.
Yeah.
She's a really nice lady. She used to always come to me and she used to always get yuca. And she used to always make them cut the yuca to make sure they were white inside.
Yes, that's spicy Ramonita, right?
And you remember my mom when she used to come here also?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because this is where we used to come when I was a little girl, and then I used to bring her, and I used to see you, and you and her had such a nice relationship, and she used to push you get her guandules.
Because your mom was a very funny lady.
She was, and she made one of the best mole de guandule, and now my sisters say that I make the best mole de guandule out of all of us, and we're 5. So I really love when they come to my house, I make a big pot with mole de guandule, and they love it. And they were like, oh, it tastes just like Mama's. And I'm like, oh, that's
that's
good.
tradition.
That's
That we got to keep teaching our kids the way she's teaching her grandson.
Her grandson, yeah, exactly.
When my mother came from Puerto Rico, she brought a pilon with her, and this is a pilon. And at that time, there was no technology, no blender or anything like that. We used this to cook. When our parents came to this country, they didn't have much. They were poor, they had a dream. Mine came from Puerto Rico and your grandparents came from DR. The dream was always to go back one day. And unfortunately, like millions of other people that come to this country, their dreams is lost because they set the roots in this country. So the only thing that they had left was to teach us, their culture. Do you understand that, Jose? And then you one day is gonna teach your own
children. You know how beautiful that is when we're not here?
And remember one thing very important. In the Tenement Museum, we have an exhibit that represents this. Your grandmother and me being part of it for over 20 years.
Absolutely.
It is crazy. What do you think about that?
I get to learn my grandmother's way and also how to make food from different cultures, also from your culture. I get to make different foods.
That's right. So here's all the ingredients that you can put in so we can start our arroz con guandules. Jose, can you give us some of your sofrito so we could put it inside this little pot? Thank you. Preston, put some in there. Well, here's my moro de guandule.
So here's a spoon for everybody. So good.
Delicious.
How is it, Jose? You like it?
How do you like it, Preston?
It's amazing.
Amazing, right?
朝早喺屋企，朝早醒咗就做好晒我屋企啲嘢，咁就孭住個仔就去俾我家婆湊，我老爺湊。咁咧放學咯喎，咁我老爺就去接放學咯，接翻去就喺佢屋企，喺我老爺家婆屋企咯。至到我放工翻嚟咯，6點幾放工翻嚟咯，咁嘅樣。又去接晒佢哋翻嚟，先有煮飯啦。
By the 1960s and 70s, the Chinese started to immigrate in large numbers. And in Chinatown by the 1980s, you had a lot of entrepreneurs who were owners of factories, and you had thousands of workers. So this is a very small reproduction of factories that could have had 50 or 100 workers and a total of 10 to 20,000 workers in this community. And they worked in 500 or 600 factories. For the women, it was a very socialized setting because they met a lot of women like them. The production process is very socialized because you have sections of work And one section would have to wait for the prior section to finish the bundles and then pass it down to them. And food was very important. And the moms trained their kids also to help in the preparation of food. So food for the Chinese woman was very, very important. And many of these women came from periods in China where there was not enough food. And so one of the real attractions and benefits of New York and coming to America was so much food. The women shopped a lot in the markets. Since they were coming back and forth from the shop every day, they could shop fairly often. Soy sauce chicken, it's sold everywhere in Chinatown. You can see it in restaurant windows where they have the ducks hanging there and roast pork, and there's always soy sauce chicken. Soy sauce chicken in Cantonese is si yao gai, and in garment shop jargon, it meant the easy work, like bundles that were so easy to sew that you could sew a lot of them and make a lot of money, as opposed to ji guo tao, which is pork bones. The harder bundles they called, pork bones, because there's no meat on them, and you wouldn't make a lot of money sewing those pork bones. Many of the owners provided lunch for the workers, and it was out of two motivations. One was their generosity, because rice isn't cheap, and so they had the rice cooker and they had the rice, and they usually had a big pot of hot water for tea and whatnot. And so the workers could just bring their leftovers and get a big pile of rice and put it over the rice. However, the other motivation was they did want the workers not to waste time and to basically be able to eat in the shop and not wander outside and then not come back. In the union, we did have a lot of parties and celebrations involving food. And when we started to get a really big influx of Chinese workers, they demanded and everybody wanted to have Chinese food added into that spread. And it was always Chinese, Hispanic, and then other, American, you could say, American food. And we all liked to try each other's food.
I think in our culture, you don't ask someone, how are you doing? You ask them, oh, did you eat yet?
And so we'd walk by and we'd walk into Namwa to pick up, pastries. Oftentimes just the egg tart or some of these, and sometimes the char siu baos. And because I guess when I was very, very little, my dad had relatives who lived on Dwyer Street up in one of the tenements. So when we walked by, we'd always kind of walk into Namwa and just pick up stuff and bring it upstairs.
Yeah, I remember Namwa from way before your time, I think, probably in the 80s and 90s. It was used as an election headquarters to get out the vote.
I remember those days. A lot of politicians, that was the community space where they would kind of make their speech and trying to garner support and votes.
It was trying to get people to vote because the community was so invisible politically. People didn't vote, and it was really hard to get them to come out.
Yeah, I think it's gotten a lot better.
Oh, much, much better.
Yeah, a lot better.
But your generation has contributed to that a lot, I would say.
Well,
having the younger generation
it's funny.
Speaks some English and just is, kind of a bridge.
That's really interesting because I feel like there's a generation behind me that are even more vocal.
These really young ones are very
through everything that we went through the last 2 years with coronavirus to China virus to
the anti-Asian hate,
API hate. I really see, the 30 and younger crowd really fight for the community. I really am proud to see, this next generation really kind of get back into their roots and their heritage and what it means to be Asian American or Chinese American, and really fighting for the community and almost being nostalgic about it too. They want to know what grandma used to eat or mom and dad used to eat.
Teaching the Hunter College students, I usually use something from the Tenement Museum called Your Story, Our Story. It kind of connects people's cultures
to what the American culture is. Almost all of my students are immigrants themselves. And a lot of them connect to what happens to them when they first arrive. Some of them are refugees, some of them are undocumented. When they come here, they bring very little. They don't have a lot of treasures with them. Their parents can't carry a whole lot with them. And they don't remember bringing things other than maybe their clothing off their back or a stuffed animal. But what they do remember are the recipes. So food, you know, is really important in their heritage and their culture. So they remember what their parents cook for them and how they find the same ingredients. If they can't find it wherever they were put to live, sometimes in the Bronx or wherever they can find their relatives, they will go to the grocery stores, and some of them come back to Chinatown to look for the same ingredients that they had in their home country. But why food, you know, coming to your restaurant is really important in connecting their heritage, and also important in saying, we belong here too.
My friend, Chef Therese Nelson, she says, we need a blueprint. She said, I understand that my family is from Lattice, South Carolina, ended up in New Jersey, and now New York, but I don't know how we got here. We need to understand how we got here. What the food does is it points arrows at certain things, like migration patterns. Food also speaks to preferences. Preferences are very strong, and they last across journeys on ships and exile. One of the things that we have to really consider is that Black history in the African Atlantic is history of migrations, exile, movement, motion. It's on foot, it's by railway, it's by boat, it's by revolution. The Black population shifts and changes, but so does the food it eats. People don't realize the Great Migration and the domestic slave trade are two of the biggest shapers of American culture. It means that millions of enslaved people were moved between the upper South and Chesapeake into the middle and lower South. So why does the Southern diet have such a uniform pattern? Because the same people cooking the food bring some of the same plants and seeds with them, same traditions, but also some might lack resources they might have had back home. This is about the history of the people who brought these foods to the American table, about their life stories, about where they came from, who their people were. It's about people for whom a little bit of food narrative included in the rest of their biography might just make it down to the last person.
When I think about Passover, I think about this tenement often, and I think about the East European Jews who lived here and had just gotten off the boat. They had left their version of Pharaoh. They had left the Tsar. They were coming to this promised land, and just thinking about how, you know, their own experience, they had just lived through this story of the Haggadah in a way. And then when I read the article about you and the Black Seder in the New York Times, this new American world kind of was folded into this story. So tell us a little bit about the Black Passover Seder that you've created.
We have this opportunity with the Seder plate to kind of plug in the symbols that you need to do the work that you want. And for me, that's the haroset made with the pecans and molasses. Molasses symbolizing transatlantic slave trade, pecans symbolizing making the best of one's exile, transforming it to okra for African heritage, the chicken bones or the shank bone, lamb shank bone, the use of the chili pepper instead of the horseradish for hazeret, the collard greens for maror. Some people even do the hoe cake instead of matzah, made simply with corn.
And then do you use a sweet potato sometimes?
Sweet potato for the karpas, yes, the spring vegetable. Ways in which we invite Blackness to the Seder table. That, you know, above and beyond just singing Go Down Moses, which is really important. Understanding how we could be both appreciative of not living in those times, but also vigilant about how we manage our own time and affairs in our own day.
So Michael, I wanted to show you, we were talking about sweet potatoes and Passover. So this is a cookbook from 1901. So there's like knedlach, and then there's, you know, matzah ball, there's Passover latkes, there's blintzes. But here we have sweet potatoes compote.
Wow.
So I don't know if she, was looking to the future. She was able to see ahead and she would know that you'd be adding the sweet potato to the Seder plate. But it's interesting to kind of see these strands coming together.
Right, and the fact that she probably didn't have sweet potatoes in Eastern Europe.
I don't think so.
Not
Yeah,
at all.
yeah.
The story has never ended. It's only gotten more richer, more complex, and more heavily braided to bring us back to the realization that this country is a product of its own melange of different groups coming together, competing, fighting, working things out, and sometimes just being hungry together and eating some sustenance, which we can provide to each other happily or not, depending upon the energy we bring to the table.
As we trace the tenement recipes out of the tenement kitchens and into the neighborhood, we see the ways in which restaurants and markets play an outsized role today in helping preserve traditions and share cultures. What we see all together is that food is not just food. Food offers windows onto the ways in which immigrants and migrants live their lives and how we understand our nation's shared history.